The average American engine dies long before the metal inside it actually wears out. Not because the pistons fail, not because the crankshaft snaps, but because every single morning, for the first few seconds after you turn the key, your engine is quietly grinding itself apart from the inside out. Cold steel scraping against cold steel. Thousands of microscopic scars cut into metal surfaces before the oil pressure even has time to rise. And somewhere in rural Ohio, an 82-year-old Amish mechanic is still driving a truck from the Reagan administration with an engine so clean inside you could mistake it for a rebuild. No smoke, no lifter tick, no rebuild. Just one strange gray powder the modern auto industry stopped talking about decades ago. And when I first heard what was inside that powder, I understood why. 3 winters ago, I was standing in a machine shed outside Holmes County, Ohio, while sleet rattled against the tin roof hard enough to sound like gravel. In the corner sat an old Dodge pickup coated in road salt and farm dust. The odometer had rolled past 400,000 miles years earlier, the kind of mileage most mechanics would laugh at. But the engine idled so smoothly, you could balance a nickel on the air cleaner. The man who owned it, an Amish mechanic named Eli, wiped his hands on a rag and said something I haven't been able to forget since. "Engines don't usually die from work," he told me. "They die from dry starts." That sentence sent me down a rabbit hole that led through old Army maintenance manuals, forgotten engineering journals, Japanese taxi fleet studies, and one lubricant compound that somehow vanished from public conversation right around the time engines started becoming disposable. The strange part is, the fix costs less than a fast food lunch. Most people believe motor oil fully protects an engine the moment it starts. That's what the commercials imply. Golden oil pouring in slow motion, chrome parts gleaming under studio lights. But here's what nobody tells you. When your engine sits overnight, gravity pulls most of the oil down into the oil pan. The next morning, when you turn the key, the upper engine components spend several seconds with minimal lubrication, while the oil pump struggles to circulate fluid back through the system. And according to studies published by the Society of Automotive Engineers, a massive percentage of long-term engine wear happens during those first cold start moments. Not highway driving, not towing, not acceleration, starting. That's the part quietly killing the engine you're still making payments on. And decades ago, mechanics had a workaround. Not synthetic oil, not ceramic additives, not miracle engine flushes sold at dealership service counters for $89, $95. A mineral compound called molybdenum disulfide. Most mechanics just called it moly. A dull gray powder mined from rock. Cheap, unremarkable looking. Easy to ignore unless you understood what it actually does at the molecular level. Because moly doesn't behave like regular oil. Oil flows, oil drains away. Oil burns off under heat and pressure. But molybdenum disulfide bonds directly to metal surfaces. It creates a microscopic dry film layer that remains attached to engine parts, even after the oil itself has drained back into the pan. In other words, when you start the engine cold the next morning, the protection is already there before the oil even begins circulating. That's the part the old mechanics understood. And this is where the story becomes strange. In 1942, during the North African campaign, American tank crews were dealing with catastrophic engine wear caused by sand infiltration and extreme desert temperatures. Maintenance reports from the era documented experimental lubricant additives used to reduce metal friction inside military engines operating under brutal conditions. Among them was molybdenum disulfide. Army engineers discovered that engines treated with the compound showed dramatically reduced wear under extreme heat and dry start conditions. After the war, industrial machine shops adopted it. Railroad mechanics used it. Heavy equipment operators swore by it. Farmers quietly passed the knowledge along to their sons. Then, somewhere between the rise of modern dealership servicing and the explosion of planned obsolescence, the conversation faded. Not banned, not disproven, just forgotten or maybe replaced. Because a truck that runs 500,000 miles without a rebuild is wonderful for the owner. But for everyone making money on replacement parts, financing, repairs, and new vehicle sales, it's a problem. Now, before somebody in the comments screams conspiracy, let me say this clearly. Modern synthetic oils are genuinely impressive. Lubrication science today is far ahead of where it was 40 years ago, but even modern oils still struggle during cold start friction events, especially in engines that do short trips, frequent stop and go driving, or long idle periods. And that's exactly where moly still shines. In 2020, tribology researchers studying friction reduction compounds found that molybdenum disulfide coatings significantly reduced wear under boundary lubrication conditions. That phrase sounds technical, but it simply means moments where metal surfaces are close to touching before a full oil film develops. Exactly the situation inside your engine every morning. And once you know that, something changes psychologically. You stop hearing the engine the same way. You notice the brief tick on cold mornings, the slight hesitation, The rough idle that disappears after 30 seconds. The sounds you were taught to ignore suddenly feel like warnings. But here's the part most people never hear. The Amish mechanics don't use moly the way modern additive companies market it. They use tiny amounts, measured carefully, almost ritualistically. An old mechanic near Sugar Creek explained it to me beside a wood stove while snow drifted against the windows outside. He reached onto a shelf and grabbed a small glass jar filled with gray powder so fine it looked like fireplace ash. Too much is foolish, he said. Too little does nothing. But the right amount changes the life of the engine. His method was simple. Fresh oil change, fresh filter, engine warmed slightly, then roughly 2 ounces of pure molybdenum disulfide powder blended into the oil. After that, the engine idles quietly for 15 minutes so the compound can circulate and plate onto internal metal surfaces. That's it. No expensive machine, no dealership procedure, no special certification hanging on a shop wall. And what happened next shocked me more than the chemistry. The engines got quieter. Older engines with lifter ticks softened within days. High-mileage trucks stopped burning as much oil. Cold starts became smoother. Some owners claimed slight fuel economy improvements. Others noticed lower operating temperatures during towing. Now, to be fair, not every story turns into a million-mile miracle. Engines still fail. Maintenance still matters. Oil still breaks down. But what fascinated me wasn't the exaggerations. It was the consistency. Farmers, diesel mechanics, old-school machinists, independent truckers, different people in different places, repeating variations of the same forgotten practice. And once you start looking for these patterns, you see them everywhere. Knowledge doesn't always disappear because it was false. Sometimes it disappears because newer systems are more profitable. That realization hit me hard, standing in a repair shop outside Millersburg, watching a man rebuild an engine from a 2011 pickup with barely 140,000 miles on it. Sludge coated the valve train. Timing components were worn thin. The owner had followed every recommended dealership service interval, synthetic oil, premium filters, everything by the book. But the engine spent most of its life doing short commutes in freezing winters. Exactly the kind of driving older mechanics warned about, the kind where condensation builds inside the crankcase, where oil rarely reaches full temperature long enough to burn contaminants away, where cold starts become tiny acts of mechanical violence repeated thousands of times. And suddenly that little gray powder stopped sounding ridiculous. It started sounding logical. Now, there's an important limitation here, because honest information matters. Molybdenum disulfide is not magic. Using poor quality oil, ignoring maintenance, overheating an engine, or neglecting serious mechanical issues will still destroy an engine eventually. And dumping excessive additive amounts into modern engines with sensitive oil systems can create problems of its own. But that's exactly why the older mechanics respected the process, instead of treating it like a miracle cure. Small amounts, proper intervals, mechanical sympathy. That phrase came up repeatedly during these conversations. Mechanical sympathy. The idea that machines last longer when treated with understanding instead of abuse. And maybe that's the real thing modern culture lost. Not just the additive, the mindset. Because the old mechanics didn't see engines as disposable appliances. They saw them as companions, investments, something maintained carefully enough to hand down to the next generation instead of trading in every 5 years for another monthly payment. A mechanic in Lancaster County told me something that stayed with me the entire drive home. The companies want you loyal to the dealership, he said, but the machine wants you loyal to the machine. I thought about that while staring at rows of brand new vehicles under bright dealership lights later that week. Trucks costing more than houses did a generation ago. Engines packed with complexity, turbochargers, sensors, plastic components engineered for efficiency, but often not longevity. And underneath all of it, metal still rubbing against metal. The laws of friction never changed, only the business around them did. So the next time you start your vehicle on a freezing morning, listen closely for the first few seconds after the engine fires. The tick, the scrape, the dry mechanical chatter hiding beneath the idle. That sound is time leaving the engine one microscopic layer at a time. And maybe somewhere in a quiet workshop in Ohio, an old mechanic already solved part of that problem decades ago with a spoonful of gray powder nobody was supposed to remember. If this opened your eyes to how much practical knowledge quietly disappeared between generations, stay close to Vitanova Health, because there are more forgotten systems, more buried techniques, and more pieces of old-world engineering still hiding in plain sight than most people realize.